because I used to do it in the English mold where you had to have sort of like this theme and this story, and the more, if you could make people cry in it as well, that would be that would win you awards. If I could go back to that 14.5-year-old and say what I'm up to now, and say that I'm chatting to you and saying that I'm going to have a second American comedy album going to be launched, in June, and wife and kids, and being able to support my family through comedy and making jokes and stuff, and still working hard, still being true to yourself and stuff, and that would be I think that kid would have really needed that at 14.5, especially after that first joke when it didn't land.
So this is the part of the conversation we're having where there's tears, and that then wins an award. Is that how the prize works? That's
that's exactly right. That's what I need to put in my festival show.
Hey, kia ora team. Today's episode is brought to you by Mr. Vintage. Mr. Vintage is New Zealand's most iconic t-shirt brand. Doesn't matter if it's a local pop cultural phenomenon, a sporting event, or even a New Zealand personality, there's every chance that Mr. Vintage has made a t-shirt for them and some product for it. Kiwi owned since 2004, selling Kiwiana t-shirts and gifts online. There's even a range of king sizes for us bigger fellas. Today, Mr. Vintage and us want to give you an extra special. How about 20% off any men's t-shirt? All you need to do is go to mrvintage.co.nz. In the checkout, use the promo code FUNNY, FUNNY, and you will get 20% off any men's t-shirt. Head to mrvintage.co.nz, enter the promo code FUNNY at checkout for 20% off any men's t-shirt. G'day, Nick.
Hey, Pat. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing very well. I'm looking to get a bit of a lesson from you in podcasting today. You're a multi-gold winning award podcaster that you are, and trying to figure out what this whole world is all about. But no, really, we're here to talk comedy. So thanks for jumping in, and thanks for having a chat with me about comedy today.
No worries. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for inviting me.
No, I'm excited. The last time I talked to you in a capacity of a podcast, you were just about to release On Trend. And I remember doing the podcast with you, and I went and pre-bought it whilst we were doing the podcast of iTunes.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
How did that end up going for you? Like what was the for people who don't know, we're talking about basically an audio stand-up album, but on iTunes. Much like we used to get in the 80s and 90s, not a video content, but it was an audio one. How did that end up going? How did that work for you?
Yeah, it was good. So it was January 2021, I think, that I recorded it, and then I released it in May, and it went really well. It got to number 4 on all albums sold on iTunes. So I'll try and send you the photograph actually, or the screenshot I took. I think I was number 4, and then Bob Marley's Greatest Hits was number 3, or something like that. And it was so surreal. And it was like the Black Keys, I think, were 4th or 5th or number 1 or something like that. I'll send you I'll try and send you the screenshot, because it's pretty it was pretty surreal to get that. I mean, You can take that 2 or 3 ways, that it was a success, or you can take it in another way, that nobody buys albums anymore off iTunes, and so the numbers are a bit skewed.
That's a very good question, because I don't even think Apple iTunes is Apple iTunes anymore. I don't use it. I use Apple Podcasts, and I use Spotify for music and stuff. But forgive me for my ignorance, but I don't even think it's iTunes anymore. I think iTunes is where you go to buy fucking ringtones, but I don't know about playing albums and stuff or music through iTunes. I think, is it changed to Apple Radio or Apple something or other else, or Radio Apple or something like that? And you have subscriptions
so Apple
now.
Music.
You don't buy albums.
Yeah,
Apple Music.
That's right. Apple Music. Yeah, so it's on Apple Music. But it's weird though, because the iTunes charts are like or like the Apple chart to like the chart to get
For
onto.
sure. Yeah.
That's what the comedy dynamics people were saying anyway. But yeah, it went really well. Like, so financially and stuff, it was good. I can't retire, but it more than paid for the special and a bit more, which was fantastic.
Cool.
And but the good thing about the deal, which is kind of what I did, why I did it in the first place, which was to launch myself in America
Hmm.
without actually having to go there. So at the time we were in quarantine and lockdowns and all
Yeah,
that kind of
right.
stuff, or we'd just come out of it. And then I think that was 2021. So then I think then Auckland still had another like I think we had 108 days where we were sort of locked away and locked down and that kind of situation towards the end of the year. But so yeah, it was a really great way for me to get into America. Without being able to travel. And they were pretty relaxed with me being able to record it in Mapua and Nelson of all places, and
Cool.
but that I don't think before that they would have been able to do that, or they wouldn't have been so relaxed on that, and
Right.
so but because it went really well and they were really happy with the outcome and the product, I've literally just been off the email with them, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, and they want to do another one. So
Oh, fantastic.
so it's good. So yeah, so I'm going to record it one, and I think June 9th and June 10th are the dates that I'm going to be recording the new hour. And so yeah, so it went really well. It got played all across this channel called Laugh USA, which is like on
Hmm.
Sirius XM. So digital radio is huge in America and the UK, and they have like dedicated comedy channels. And so my one was on Laugh USA, and there's a couple other channels that it goes on. It's on Pandora and all sorts of other channels and stuff. And then so what happens is whenever it gets played on Sirius XM, it works out like a radio play. So, for
Right.
example, LAB or 660 or whatever, if they get played out on ZM or whatever radio station, there's like a code that goes onto their little track. And whenever that gets done, once a month or I think once every 2 weeks or whatever, the radio station logs that code or says, "Hey, we played that song," and then they will get XYZ amount of dollars per play. And so I've got two tracks that are doing quite well, and they are on. I don't even know what the terminology is, but it's kind of like soft rotation or whatever. So it's not
Rotate.
like
Yeah.
it's not like a, yeah, it's not like a hit. It's not like a, um, it's not a Harry Styles type. You get it getting played every second or third hour.
Yeah.
But I get
On a
I get
million
the
radio
little.
stations, Harry Styles. That's the other thing. It's every second or third
Yeah,
hour on a
absolutely. Yeah,
million radio stations.
exactly. Across the world,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So I'm on
But that's
probably
it. So
about
just
three or
so I'm
four.
clear. So you're it's a clip. It's like you buy a comedy album. There's 12 tracks, so it's not the whole album. It's like track two, whatever that track two bit
Mm,
was. That's the bit
mm.
that's getting played. You've got a couple of those that's getting quite good rotation around the place.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Cool.
I think on my album it's called John Lennon Quotes, and then there's another one I can't remember. But there's just basically there's two that are like they just keep playing it. And so I get a spreadsheet of how many times I've played it. And I think if you go into Sirius XM, I think it's called XM playlist or whatever, you can actually see what time they play it. And so sometimes I'll play it at 6 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I'll play it like 4 p.m. Sometimes I'll play it like 7:02 p.m. But I'll probably get played maybe 2 or 3 times a week, just across Laugh USA, and yeah, and other tracks get played, but they're not as frequent, and so they must have just different frequencies of rotation, and so yeah, so the two
Nice.
tracks that are, and I get a check in them. Well, a check. I get money in my account every
A
month,
check in the mail.
from the thing, a check in the mail, and it's again I can't retire off it, but it's it's good. It's passive income on an album that for me is done and gone. And so, I'll bring out some of those jokes for like corporate events or some, greatest hits, like or some tough club, club shows and stuff. But other than that, those jokes are sort of done and retired. And to be able to get paid money from that is fantastic. And so this new album will
Yeah,
be
that's
a
true.
similar deal, where so in my mind, if I can get another 3 or 4 tracks on there, then that just adds to the money coming in. And it's kind of like, all you need is one hit. You need that one hit wonder that kind of that people resonate with, and yeah, and that sort of explodes you to the next level. But off the
Very
back of
cool.
that, I managed to get this thing called a Drybar special. So what that means is, if you Google Drybar, it's basically clean comedy. It's not a
Right.
clean comedy. It's like their whole ethos is laughter for everyone. So 11-year-olds can watch it and 9-year-olds can watch it. And Drybar comedy, they do they've got like 7.8 million followers on Facebook and about 2 point something million on YouTube. And they just churn out loads of. Oh, so you all got the website up there. So
Yeah.
yeah, they've got loads of different ones. But on the Facebook side of it, they they do really yeah. So like the app's just up there, Drybar comedy, and it's a whole beast. It's a whole beast. And I get I'll get revenue from that. But I recorded it in October last year, and that'll be out later. I think maybe even later this year, or maybe even 2024.
So that's a whole new
And
that's a whole new set. That's not on trend. That's
Yeah,
something completely new.
that's a half-hour special that will have like maybe 10 or 11 or 12 minutes of the on-trend stuff and about 18 minutes of new stuff. And yeah, and then this new hour that I'm going to be doing will probably have sort of maybe, yeah, I'd say maybe that whatever I did on the dry bar comedy, maybe sort of 12, 15 minutes of that, and then the rest 45 minutes of all new stuff. So yeah, so it's so yeah, and a very long-winded way. It was a success, but in a way that it's a building. It's a never, like, you never win at comedy. You just keep going, and that's it.
Wow. That's a depressing thought. You never win at comedy. So no one wins at Richard Pryor never won at comedy?
Sure, yeah, that's very true. There are people that win, but in terms of me, the journey man, the person who has to, doesn't really, for whatever reason, get, a lot of TV stuff or a lot of industry recognition, I guess.
Yeah.
Not so much recognition, because I've had industry recognition, but yeah, just for whatever reason, uh, haven't quite, not quite filling out the arenas quite yet, but working towards it.
You do seem to be one of the few New Zealand comedians who are sort of doing comedy like it's always been done when it comes to content. Like, I think about the Ursula Carlsons,
Mm,
the Netflix specials and that kind of stuff, but I don't know if there's
mm,
many, if any, as Scribe once said, people.
mm,
Well, I got to be careful because I'm sure there are, but it doesn't feel like
mm.
there's many kind of focusing on that, making albums and putting them out. Like, it seems like what you've done with On Trend is made an album and put it out, and that's given you another opportunity to make another album. And that doesn't seem to be like, I often talk to comedians, right, who do this or in other parts of my life, and I go, but it's not that expensive this day to put up 3 cameras when you're doing your set at the comedy festival. Then you've got content, and a lot of them are just like, yeah, I just don't think I don't want to, and I'm just like, I don't get it. It seems like the international model, like especially in America, is they tour for a year, then they record it, then it's the special. You seem to be one of the few in New Zealand who, even if it's not quite as black and white as I'm portraying it, seem to be following that ethos a
Mm.
little bit.
Yeah, and it came by accident. It came from COVID, because I wasn't going on this path, because I think last time we spoke, I got my big break. I was going to Australia. I got a 2-year deal on an Australian
That's right.
TV, doing a comedy sports show, and then because of COVID, it fell over. So I had to, even though it absolutely floored me in terms of, that this was the break, monetary and also kudos as well. But then, just this American thing came up, and then it sort of changed my way that I look at doing specials now. Because I used to do it in the English mold, where you had to have sort of like this theme and this story, and the more, if you could make people cry in it as well, that would be that would win you awards. And but in America, but in America, it's like it's different. It's a different method. They speak. They talk in bits. They talk in tracks. They talk in minutes. They talk in like late show appearances. They talk in like, for us it's like gala sets. It would be the most equivalent situation of doing a late night talk show or whatever. And so so I've sort of it's only the last 2 years, or since 2021, where I've actually made the album and seen where it can go. And then it just gives me a purpose to write now every year. I sat on that hour for like 13, 14 years. I sort of did the Seinfeld method of just going, well, I can just work on this, and I can work. But then I was like, okay, and I still did other hours, but I would just sort of cherry pick the 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes out of that each hour to make it as strong, the strongest hour I could. But then like sets are kind of like a lot like fruit, in that they have a ripening period, and then they sort of rot horrendously in the bowl, some worse than others. So for me, it was a time to it gives me a purpose. So the people like Ursula and stuff who saw the Melbourne situation, and so every year they were going, and she purposefully went there, and it was a long-term goal. Guy Montgomery's doing the same thing, where every year he would go and get bigger and bigger each time, and it sort of made him and her go and write continuously, so they always had new material. But because I wasn't doing that, it's kind of it was, and I was also getting a lot of TV writing, and I was doing bits of appearances here and there, and I was getting some stuff in Australia and stuff. So I guess that's all I would say, is that it's not necessarily everyone's doing it, but so and I'd love to have been handpicked to present all of the different TV shows, or be the main character on all the different panel shows and stuff, but it didn't work out that way. So then you just go, okay, well, now what are you going to do? And so for me, I have to find my own hole in the ice, and at the moment it looks like that overseas is what's giving me the most recognition and the most kudos, and sort of working towards it. And so so America is going well, and it's going well. And my next, so I've also done a deal with Next Up Comedy, which is in the UK. So they've got my on trend album, and they just messaged me last week just to say that they're doing a deal with America and Canada for Just for Laughs, so it'll go on their Just for Laughs channels and stuff. And so I should be able to get a little bit of a cut of that. Again, it won't be huge, but it's passive income, so it works well.
You just said something quite interesting. You kind of referenced what I was going to say, that the idea of preparing for something seems to make sense to me. I mean, like if you were a golfer and the Masters were coming up, you'd probably prepare yourself specifically for that event, and you might work a bit harder on your preparation. So preparing for Melbourne, or preparing for, it sort of seems similar, that's what people do just naturally if they've got something big coming up. So it kind of makes sense. But I was just going to say, you kind of sort of described yourself as you'd like to do or be everything. Like you'd like to be on the panel shows, or you'd like to host whatever. And it prompts me to one of the questions I ask all my comedians is, who are you? What are you at your core? I mean, Michelle Acorn said it perfectly, which was like, what do you write when you're going into another country on the entry form? Like if you were to pick out one thing that you are, is it presenter? I mean, you've had a stack load of awards for emceeing work. Is it a presenter? Is it MC? Is it stand-up comedy? Is it a entertainer? Like, how would you define yourself when it comes to who you are at your core? As a writer?
Yeah, no, it's something that I've had to learn over the last couple of years. Yeah. I mean, it's different. It's different in different times. So at the moment, I've really, in the last couple of years, especially, like Ursula's really great at this in terms of she's always said you got to protect your brand, and I kind of got what she
Mm-hmm.
meant, but I didn't really know what she meant. And so since I now am since I now have really protected, like sort of formed myself as like a clean comic, and clean is like, it's kind of like I don't swear, and I don't really do politics, and I don't really do any sort of sexual stuff or whatever. And that's not because I don't think that's funny or that you can't get laughter out of that, but it's just like I've got to, that's sort of where my comedy lies. And since I've sort of gone and down that route, it's now people expect that of me, and so now I have to be a lot more cleverer with my joke choices. So there's some like really great jokes that I've written. I'm going, oh man, I wish I could do that joke, because it gets a big laugh. But when it comes from me or it's delivered from me, people kind of like, they just sort of turn off from it, and they kind of like,
Right.
they
It's
don't,
not your brand.
yeah, they don't expect that. It's not my brand. And so
Yeah.
things like 7 days, for example, previously was like it's quite full on. It's quite like an R18 show, and it was, it was pretty. It had a reputation for being pretty rude and pretty crude. And then
Yeah.
when I was going on those shows, I was having to go into that mold, and it wasn't me. And then so it was a difficult sort of gear shift, because people who saw me on that show and liked me, and then would come to my show, would be like, um, they would get a different feel for it. And it's yeah, so I had to sort of protect that.
Could it not have worked like the quote unquote blue, and I'm using an American old 1960s, the blue
Mm.
comedians beside you on the panel being blue and you being clean? Would that just not have worked in the format of 7 days?
Yeah, it could have, definitely could have worked. But I didn't know my brand well enough, and I kind of was transitioning as well, from like mostly clean to fully clean whilst I was on the show and whilst I was
Right.
doing the show. And so yeah, it could have worked, but I think if I had a really known my brand and really known what I wanted to do, I think I would have done it differently. I would have pretended not to know what they were talking about when they were going smutty, or if they did go there, I would come in with a real like honest, or almost like religiously, I'm not Christian, I'm not religious, but I'd have to almost lean into that side of it to kind of, pretend, yeah, so that people would know that that's what I was doing as a character, not as a character, but that was what my brand was. But I didn't know it,
Your
and
lane.
I have a big
Yeah.
philosophy of you blame yourself or you blame no one. And so that's not like a negative thing, and don't beat yourself up. It's not like, it's not like woe is me or anything like that. It's not even being really berating myself in any shape or form. What it means is like, what could I have done differently to make that better? So, if you don't get the breaks, it's like, it's not their fault, it's not someone else's fault. It's like, okay, what could I do better to make that happen? And so for me, it was about, okay, well, let's lean into this clean comedy. Where can that go? And then now I've got like a lot more corporate work, a lot more American work, a lot more overseas
Yeah.
work. I've got these different albums coming out. I can now attack the Laugh USA, which is a clean, like, comedy channel. When I go do corporate gigs, I don't have to change up my stuff at all, because it's like tested in the clubs and stuff. And yeah, so but it's so yeah, so that's what I would do differently if I was to do that again. But again, I had to go through all of that to get to the point where I am now, where I go, oh, now I
Yeah.
understand it, because
Yeah.
otherwise,
No.
yeah, some people would click, and it clicks with them early. And sometimes like you have like people like Eddie Murphy and all that kind of stuff, and Dave Chappelle and whoever else at sort of 13, 14 or 15, they're like already pretty great comics. And then when they get to like 21, 22, they're like world beating comics. And it's kind of, you know, it's, it's, it's just one of those things. If when you know, but you can't, I try and tell my kids stuff, and they go, yeah, yeah, and they just don't. it'll either sink in or it doesn't. And so
Yeah.
for me, it's just it's sunk in a little bit later in my comedy world, but it's good now that I've got that brand, and now I'm leaning into it, and I'm writing the new hour, the new that's leading up to this comedy special and taping in June, and it's being able to allow me to Chris Rock talks about joke selection. He says that there's like this other comic who's like this really great comic, and he really rates his comic. He says the only difference between Chris Rock and this other guy is his joke selection. And what he means by that is
Right.
like everything or most things that Chris Rock talks about is within Chris Rock's sort of brand or what he does. And so yeah, but I've only just sort of found, and going back to your initial question of who am I to my core, I guess my thing is to make yeah, it's just to make as many people as laugh as I can, um, using like real life situations, and just sort of yeah, making light and shining fun on just everyday situations, and so much so that everyone can enjoy it. And that's sort of build everything around it in terms of my new hours and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of different comedians doing different things, but
Yeah.
that's what I'm focusing on at the moment. Yeah.
I think about Jim Gaffigan when I hear you describing yourself. The other thing, and I'm not saying you'd ever do this, I can't even remember what it was. That shows it doesn't have that much of an impact. But when Jim Gaffigan came out and got really grumpy about something, I think through the pandemic, and he
Yes.
swore. And I
Totally.
was like, the whole world went, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, Jim Gaffigan said a sweary word. And actually, the use of
Yeah.
that word at that time had so much more impact coming from him because it wasn't his brand. So I'm not saying that you were
Yeah.
loading up to be able to do it at some stage, but it almost being a clean comic gives more power to those words if and when one chose to use them, and kind of gives them more gravitas and more weight as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that I don't find it funny, or I don't
Yeah.
find or
Yeah.
don't
Yeah. I get
use
it.
the word, or don't use those words, or don't think that you can ever derive comedy from it. The exact opposite. I mean, some of my people who make me laugh so much, you know, um, lean into that kind of comedy. But again, it's like it's the English language. It's a part of it, and so it's just like use the right words at the right time, to emphasize your point. And listen, it's for me like there's so many jokes which I know could go so much better, um, if I just let go. But and it takes me so much longer to write the jokes to get across the same
Mm.
amount of angst or the same amount of shock, I guess, as well, and surprise. But it takes so much longer. But and it's not to say that it's easier either to get a laugh, because it's just comedy is just one of it's that tightrope of like, you lean a little bit this way and you fall over, and lean a bit the other way and it falls over. So it's not having a go at anyone else. It's just I'm just sort of focusing on what I do, and I'm just being a bit harder on myself and being a bit more disciplined.
Do you ever come up with a joke or a concept that isn't clean and go, oh, fuck, that's really funny?
Yeah.
Now, how do I make that
Yes.
clean and be as funny? Does that happen?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll work. Oh yeah, definitely.
Wow.
So, um, yeah, definitely. So it's not even so much clean either. It's some of it is like offensive. So
Right.
I'll tell this joke. I wrote this joke. Um, I'm doing this bit about uh, there's a couple. There's a couple. So I wrote this joke which went um about going to work, and like I think I was like 20 or 21 at the time, and it was in around the early 2000s. And I just hated this job. I was working at this IT place or whatever, and so I hated this job. And so the joke is, have you ever hated a job so much so, that when you were going in there you wished something really terrible would happen to that workplace? And I remember watching. the Twin Towers in 2001, September 11, and I'm thinking to myself, oh man, wrong building. And then they would laugh, and then I'd go, oh, wrong building again. And then so the whole, and people would go, oh, like that, and it would just be like this, and comics would love it, oh, that's such a great joke and all that kind of stuff. But whenever I tell it, people are like, ooh. And there's one that I wrote the other day for just people. So, and there's some that go the opposite as well. Like some is just like a nonchalant, everyday occurrence. So there's this joke I'm doing about how long is it how long is it to, like, how many nights is too many nights to stay over at someone's house? And
Right.
so it's just like it's a fun little thing, but everyone's got an opinion on it. And the joke I wrote was, I go to the crowd and I say how many, and they normally say like 2 or 3 nights is the max. And I said, listen, we had these people come over for a whole week, and they didn't bring anything. In fact, they just bought their dirty washing. And the joke is, it's the last time I help out flood victims. And so, from me, I can't tell that joke, because when I do, they laugh and it's good. But then I kind of like, it's interesting. It's just an interesting feeling. I can sort of like know that, like, other people go, just do it, it's fine, it doesn't matter. But then for whatever reason, for the rest of my set, it's just a bit like they're either wanting more of that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
which is fine, which is great, or they sort of go, oh, they don't know where I'm going, so they feel like, yeah, and it goes against my ethos of trying to get as many people to laugh as possible. So if anyone's like triggered, or if anyone's like had experience in the room, then they're suddenly thinking about that experience, and then I'm all of a sudden I'm like, I've lost their hold or their attention or what have you. And so I just really think about that kind of stuff. And yeah, like I do stuff that I won't say, I'll try not to say, unless it's really imperative to the joke, I'll try not to say, now in the last 6 months or so, I'll try not to say husband or wife. I'll say partner.
Oh, right.
I'll say, I won't give a friend a gender, or or whatever, or he or she or whatever. I'll just sort of throw out the
Even
stereotype,
if you know that's their pronoun, like if you're talking about a friend and you know they're a he, you still
yeah.
won't say he when you're using that example. Interesting.
Yeah, I'd say I've got a friend like this. And the reason why I'm doing that is because people in the audience may have a friend like that, but it might not be a guy, so they can't relate to it. But instantly they'll put, if I
Right.
can frame it in a way that is like, that as many people can latch onto that, or fill the gaps as possible, but to make it relatable to them, then that's what I'm trying to do. So
Let me ask you this. This is fascinating to me because
oh,
there's
okay.
also there's a pushback against that from some, especially conservative American areas. And I would think that
Uh-huh.
your comedy, actively being clean, even though you haven't said there's any religious aspect for you personally, that community would be able to listen to it and enjoy it. But that's also the same community that would push back against, these sorts of themes around partner and them theirs and that kind of stuff. So when you're saying you're wanting to do it to as many people as possible, how do you then weigh up in your head, like, what if that audience was bigger, that wanted he, she, rather than them there, or that wanted husband, wife rather than partner? So you making those choices actually may lessen your audience. How do you go through that in your planning?
Well, it's because that a lot of it they won't know, because I've done it in a way, because I don't want it to be detrimental to the joke. So, for example,
Yep.
like I won't. Um, it's kind of like it's just going through the old, like, it's kind of going through the old racist jokes. Really, is like, did that person in that story need to be Chinese in that story for that story to be funny?
Right.
It's, or like,
Right.
whatever. And it's kind of like, so you sort it's also like, you know, do you need that many words to tell the joke, to get to the punchline? It's like, can I mention, um yeah, like partner or friend or whatever, um and get away without actually saying exactly who it is. And it's not because it's like, I'm trying to, yeah, like step on anyone's toes. In fact, I'm trying to bring more people in. And so, yeah, so that,
Mm,
going to that thing, they won't know, but I'm also not, I'm not afraid to then go, if it's imperative to the joke. Like, there's a joke that I'm writing at the moment, which it's imperative that it's a granddad, and it's imperative that he's of a certain age and it's old, and he's a
right.
certain way, and he's a little bit backwards in his thinking, and he's a little bit, you know, he's a little bit old school in his thinking. It's imperative that he is that. So I call him granddad in the joke, because that's the, it has to happen. But if it was like, if it didn't need to be, I could just say grandparent, and, you
Right.
know, and it doesn't lose anything from the joke, but they sort of know the rough, you know, the rough stereotype or whatever. But there's jokes that I do that are like, if you actually saw what the subject matter is, you go, oh, you can't do jokes about that. But I do it in such a way that it's, no, it's come from a personal space, but it's also, it's funny. It's really funny. It's one of my favorite
Yeah.
jokes at the moment because of it, because I'm treading on this line of like, you can't make jokes about this, but I've managed to do it. And yeah, and yeah, I won't say it because I won't I won't ruin it, because it's going to be in the new special. But
Of
yeah,
course.
there's lots of that kind of stuff. But yeah, so I think it's just, I think with the way that I've been, you know, being hard on myself with the clean aspect of it, it then sort of, it's training for other aspects as well. It's like, well, how, you know, how it's like, it's basically writing hard, is what Bill Burr
Right.
calls it. He just says is writing hard. So don't go for the easy, you know, joke. And if you think it's there, and if you think that's the end of it, then, you know, what happens if we put another half an hour, 45 minutes, or, you know, whatever, into writing that, or trying it out a different way or a different angle. And yeah, so I guess it's yeah, putting pressure on myself to make it as funny as possible, which is, I mean, and which is hard. Yeah.
Do you think, completely change of tact here, right?
Mm.
Um, do you think that AI is a risk to comedy? Have you spent much time looking at Chat GPT?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, it's very tempting, especially when you're writing an hour, because you're just like, write me an hour of stand-up comedy, and it'll do it for you.
I did this. I did this. What I've done is I've actually
Yeah,
jumped on Chat GPT this morning, and I thought we might do one
yeah.
together as an experiment. And I
Okay,
asked the
cool.
question: is Nick Rado funny? Right? Nick Rado is a New Zealand comedian and comedy writer.
Awesome.
He is his comedy style may be funny to some people and not as funny to others. It's nicely fence sitting there, eh? As humor is subjective and can vary from person to person, it is ultimately up to
Yeah,
individuals to decide if they find Nick Rado's humor funny or not. But what I
yeah,
thought I might do is, what about if we did
yeah,
this, right? So there's the
yeah,
question: is AI a
yeah,
threat to comedy? What if I wrote this?
yeah,
Write me a joke never
yeah.
heard before, and see what
Oh,
it
that's
says.
interesting.
What is it going to say? Sure, here's one. Why don't
What?
scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. I'm sure that's been said before. I'm sure that's
Yeah,
been said before.
yeah. This
And
is,
I was,
yeah,
I mean, could you? I mean, well, let's do this. If I just put right,
okay.
you said an hour of comedy. Write an hour of comedy about American politics. And just so people
Maybe,
know,
yeah.
I haven't set this up. I don't know what it's going to say. We're not going to
No,
read it, obviously,
no,
but we'll see if it goes
no.
for it or not. AMERI. What have I spelled wrong there? I don't know. We'll hit enter. Don't know what it is. And it
Maybe a
just,
capital A.
maybe. I'm sorry, but as an AI model, I cannot provide an hour of comedy about American politics. However, I can give you some tips on how to write a comedic monologue about American politics. Okay, so there you go.
Yeah.
I won't quite do it. But is this kind of stuff
So,
going to become? Are we going to see the result of AI in? I mean, are we already in comedy clubs around the world?
Well, I can tell you right now because I was the head writer for 7 days for about 7 or 8 years,
Yep.
and if I had had Chat GPT in the writers' room, I tell you what, it would have made my life a whole lot easier. The reason being is because I would sit in a room with two other comics, and
Yep.
then we would just basically try and come up with about 110, 120 jokes in the room for the for the show, and
Okay.
then we would pitch them to Jeremy the next day, and so on and so forth. You would write the jokes, and you would you have and I used to try and get like maybe two or three really really great ones, and then five or six sort of pretty good ones. And so and that was sort of the aim, so you're sort of aiming between 6 and 10 jokes per story,
Okay.
of but they're really top level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now what would happen a lot is you get into the room, and the two or three brains that were in there would run out of ideas. So they'd run out of angles, they'd run out of whatever. But what ChatGPT does, or what I would do with that, is like you would say, give me 30 angles about like, so for example, there's a story about what was one of the stories this week. I haven't really been following the news, but let's say, for example, it's a bouncy castle company has gone into receivership, and it owes
Going
lots of people
bankrupt.
money or whatever.
Bankrupt.
Goes bankrupt,
All right.
and you just go, write me 10 angles,
I put 30, but
comedic
there you go.
angles, yeah, yeah,
Sure,
of
here are 30 angles about a bouncy castle going into bankruptcy. The company's mascot, Bouncy Castle, being repossessed. Customers demand refund for cancelled bookings. So this is literal
yeah.
news ideas. An employee's reaction to losing their job. Oh, but I guess then you could take that.
But yeah,
Yeah,
so then we
right.
would take that angle and then we'd write jokes about it, and we'd go, "Oh, that's a great angle," and they might give us 30, but I only need 7 or 8 angles, and
Yeah.
so therefore that I would be like, so there's a bit that I do at the moment, which so what I use
Wow.
ChatGPT for
Yep.
isn't the fact of writing and delivering the stand up. What I use it as a writing partner. So I would say, like, there's a bit that I'm doing on escape rooms, which is my closing bit at the moment, which is going really well. And I was like, oh, give me angles about escape rooms and all this kind of stuff, because they like ChatGPT can't get this story that I've got in my personal thing. But what it did do, I think it gave me just an angle. I think it was just a word it used. It was like something. I think it was called something like survival or something like that. And I was like, I could use that angle and to help flesh out the joke a little bit. So
Nice.
this is like having a writer that doesn't complain or doesn't get tired.
Slave labor, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, pretty much. And so I don't think it's going to replace. I don't think it's going to replace comedy, and I don't think it's going to, and who knows, it might do. It might come up with really great stuff. But the thing with, if you write jokes and stuff like that, a lot of this is taking it from, all on the internet. So I think there's another AI tool where you can go into and it actually tests if how plagiarized it is,
Yeah, yeah.
or or where, and you can even ask ChatGPT, where did you get this information from? Give me the references to where it's from. And so I would say anyone trying to cheat the system like that, eventually you're going to get found out. But what I would say with it is, I feel like comedy's going to get better because you've got these there's no excuse now to not have a writing partner.
Yeah. No, that's
If you write,
really
if you are,
interesting.
yeah,
That's really
yeah,
interesting. I think what I hear you saying is you hear this conversation happening a lot around new technology, even like when the Sky Tower was being built in Auckland, there was all these, especially religious groups, going like, oh, it's immoral. It's like, actually, technology is neither moral nor or immoral. How we use it,
no,
though, can
yes,
be. And I think just to
yes,
wrap up the conversation around Chat GPT, I'm going to do one more thing,
yes.
which is tell me a unique knock knock joke. See what it comes up with. Sure, here's one. Knock knock. You can do this. Knock knock.
Oh, I can't see it.
Yeah, you can just do your part. Knock knock. Oh,
Oh,
you do
sorry.
your
Who's there? Yeah, who's there?
alpaca.
Alpaca who?
Alpaca the suitcase. You loader the car. I don't think that's unique either, but
I mean,
But
come
there you
on.
go. Yeah, that's a
I feel like
badumch if I've never
that's
heard one
been done,
before.
but I think
Yeah.
it's listen, it's not. My son and daughter would love that one, but I think yeah, absolutely. I think it's the way that you use it, and I feel like there's going to be people that will actually become very big and very famous from it, but there'll be
Wow.
a time where they'll get found out and they'll be put on the spot or they'll get a big gig and something will happen and they just don't have the chops to
It's the
what we
South
call
Park
the
episode.
yeah.
Have you seen the South Park episode about Chat GPT?
No,
All the
no,
boys start using it to write text messages back to their girlfriends, and all their girlfriends
right,
think, "Oh my god, this is the most romantic boy
yeah,
there has ever
yeah,
been," and that's just because they're using it. They're using
yes,
AI. How should I respond to this text? And they're the most
yeah,
perfect response, and then they all get caught out. So it's kind of a
yes.
version of that on some level. Yeah, no, but I can see how you use it as a writing partner is a great idea. Like to get ideas, because obviously a comedian then needs to turn that premise or that idea or that prompt into a salient joke to entertain an audience, which they can't do.
And theoretically, we should all be doing it differently. So, like like me, for example, taking those bouncy castle, ideas, and Ursula Carlson
Yep.
taking those bouncy castle ideas, we should go in different directions with it. If we're staying true to our brand, and
Yep.
um, unfortunately, though, when you're a younger comic and when you're coming up, and listen, I've been doing this for gosh, coming up to 17, 18 years. And I've only just found like what I think my brand is in the last year or two. So it's, it kind of, yeah, it's, you'll find it out. But again, the only way you can do it is like getting up and then there's writing it as one element, but performing it's another element. There's just so many different ways that you can suck at it. So yeah, so I do agree that that it's scary, but I actually think it's if you've I think it's actually going to be amazing. It should lift the standard of comedy, to be honest.
That's
Mm.
cool. It's quite exciting when you put it like that. Actually, it's using technology to make things better rather than relying on technology to do the job for you. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, there shouldn't be any lazy jokes anymore. So hopefully, fingers crossed, you don't see any of my new special. But yeah.
Hey, when did you know you were funny? Like, do you have a moment in your life where you remember kind of going, ah, okay, so the gods of comedy have dropped something on me and I can make people laugh?
Yeah, so I was actually like, I mean, a mute is a pretty harsh word, but I didn't say anything. I was so shy. I was so quiet and timid and small as a kid. From up until I was about 15, so I didn't say anything. I
Right.
remember, I think my family talk about this actually. They said that um I couldn't even ask when I was over because I've got an older brother who's like
Mm-hmm.
10, 11, 12 years older than me. And I was just over at his house when I was like 13, 14, over at his house. And I couldn't even ask him that I wanted a glass of water because I was so shy.
Wow.
And, but I knew that I wanted to be a comic since I was 14. And so, but I, and like, so whenever I told anyone like that or close friends or whatever, they're like, how the heck are you going to be, you can't even ask for your brother for a glass of water. And then I remember there was this, I think I must have been about 14 and a half or something like that. I remember there was this kid called James Livingston who I'm mates, really great mates with, one of my best mates now, and he was the man. He was so funny. He was the class clown, and everyone, and he was so popular because of it. And he was just so funny. But I remember like hearing his like the stuff that he was doing, and I remember going, oh, it's quite funny. But I would always think of something that would top it or that would be funnier to add to it or even just be like funnier than the original thing. And I remember just sort of like I was just sitting there and like he said something, and I go, oh, that, and I didn't even laugh at it. I was like, oh, that's not even that funny. But the whole crowd was in hysterics, like whole crowd. This is getting me, the whole class. That's how I was thinking of.
Whole class.
That's how much I wanted to be a
All
comic.
six of our
That I
mates.
wanted
All six of our
second.
mates were laughing.
Yeah. Yeah. I was looking at classrooms as sold out rooms. And yeah, and I remember just going, oh no, I reckon that's, I could do better. Anyway, so I think it was an English teacher. She said something. I can't remember what the exact words were. He said something. The class laughed, and then I said something, which was really funny, but because no one expected or no one even heard me say anything before, they just all looked at me like weirdly, and it was just this weird thing. And I was just like going, oh, that was like my first joke bombing almost.
That didn't land.
And then, yeah, that didn't land. Yeah, that was a bit lazy. And then it was like a couple minutes later, this similar thing happened. The teacher said something, and then James said something, and people laughed. And then I said to top it, and I said, and then this da 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 da, and then the whole class just erupted with laughter, and it was so funny. And even James was like, oh my gosh, that was so funny, where did that come from? And I remember that feeling and going, oh wow, that, like, they thought that was funny. And it was, and I wish I had, I need to talk to James actually to see if he can remember what I said. But it's kind of like when I first did stand-up comedy, that whole 8 minutes, I know it went really, really well, but I can't remember a single thing from it. It's like I blacked out. It was just like this weird thing that just sort of, yeah, it was such a weird moment, surreal moment. But then, so from then, I think it was about 14 and a half, 15, I then got confidence to go, oh, I've got that one laugh, and then I would say other things, and other things wouldn't land, but other things would really land. And then it was like me and James were almost like this double act going on. And then, like, I remember instantly after, I think it was a morning, I think it was second period, which was just before interval. And after that class, James then invited me. He said, come with me. And we went over to like where the smokers areas, where the smokers bank or whatever it was, where all the cool kids hung out and stuff. And James was like, introduced me to everyone. He goes, this guy's hilarious. He's going to be our new mate and all that kind of stuff. And I just remember going, oh my gosh, I don't fit in, or I don't want to really want to hang out with these people. But at the same time, this is the cool great group. And I've been like, I've got a leg in. And from then on in, just everything in my life seemed to, like, whenever I was funny, or whenever I made jokes or made people laugh or made people smile, or made light of situations, things came to me. That's how I met my wife. That's how I started my family. I've supported my family. I've traveled all over the world with it. I've had beautiful dinners and highfalutin places, and then gone up and performed with people on stage. And it's all come from that kid just going, hey, I think I've got something here, and then saying it out loud and getting a laugh. And that's when I knew that I was funny. And then from then, only good things have happened from me leaning into that. And so yeah, it's been a heck of a journey. And if I could go back to that 14-and-a-half-year-old and say what I'm up to now, and say that I'm chatting to you, and saying that I'm going to have a second American comedy album going to be launched, in June, and wife and kids, and being able to support my family through comedy and making jokes and stuff, and still working hard, still being true to yourself and stuff. And that would be I think that kid would have really needed that at 14 and a half, especially after that first joke when it didn't land.
So this is the part of the conversation we're having where there's tears, and that then wins an award. Is that how the prize works? That's the
Okay. That's exactly right. That's what I need to put in my festival show. I quite often say, like, Jared Christmas cracks me up. He said, what did he say about? Sometimes he goes, we have to remember this is a comedy festival, not a feelings festival. And I kind of agree with that. But that's not to say that you can't make really sad stuff or really emotional stuff really funny or really good or really engaging? Absolutely not. Like
Yeah.
there's amazing shows out there. In fact, I did a couple of shows that told really quite heartbreaking stories, but in a funny way. And but yeah, it's just interesting that sometimes, yeah, and I think I know why, because the festival's such a long time. There's like 3 or 4 weeks, and like when you start
Right.
off in week 1 or week 2, and everyone's doing stand up, quick fire, everyday observations about stuff, it becomes then like the I've heard it before. And so when like week 3, week 4 of a festival, when you see something completely different, completely wacky, or completely emotional or really engaging, or something that you still remember or think about, days or weeks after the show's finished, that those shows end up like winning awards, and so they should. But then when they take those people or take those shows, sometimes what happens is they go, oh, this person won comedy, and then they'll go and do like a club set, or they'll go do something to a completely not their audience, and they might struggle a bit because I think you've got people coming stressed from work. They're worried about babysitters. They've come from like almost real life, and then they come and sit down, and they haven't had those 2 weeks worth of just stand up,
Yeah.
stand up, stand up, stand up to get used to it, to then get to that and that natural step to get to that level. So yeah, it's interesting, and I think a lot of comics that who win awards and stuff like that, they're so good. They're so good at writing those festival shows, and I think that they'd even admit themselves that they would have a festival show, and then they have like a club set, like a club
Oh,
15,
okay.
5, 10, 15, 20. Yeah, and I think that they would, and sometimes they can boil it down into that thing from that one show, and sometimes they go, oh, you know what, that show is just as it can only exist as that show, because there's so many intricate parts that need to be in it. And so yeah, and so I think that's my sort of ethos again. For me, like, it's that whole thing of uh, uh like, I can only concentrate on what I'm doing and things like that.
For
And
sure.
so I think yeah, each to their own, and good on people with to try and make fun, or to try and find laughter in as many things as you can. But yeah, it's just interesting that uh, going back to our original thing of the American model is just club set, tracks on a radio album or what have you. Um, like even the Drybar special that I did was only 30 minutes. It was a 30-minute special. And some of the YouTube stuff that's coming out now, which people are self-producing and things, they're
Hmm.
like, you'll see the time slots and stuff, and it's like 42 minutes or 38 minutes, or they just release a crowd work special or what have you. And I just feel like, yeah, I'd rather watch 42 minutes of absolute crushing stand up
Yeah.
than an hour, um, because a network has said that's what the time we need to fill.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I also am reminded of Dave Chappelle, one of his first three kind of comeback stand-ups, when he talked about, like you're talking about, tragedy or sad moments and making it funny. And he told the story about a black teenager in the 1950s being murdered for whistling at a white woman, and
Yeah.
it's a
Yes.
horrific story. And if people go and look that up and they look up
Yes.
the story, there are photos of his open coffin online. And that's what he was
Yeah.
basically doing. He talks
Yeah.
about the kid's mother was a gangster because she left the coffin open so everyone could see what the people did to her son. It's a
Mm-hmm.
horrific story. And he does it in a stand up routine,
Yeah.
and it works. It's amazing when you
Yeah.
see it actually work.
Yeah.
It's unexplainable.
Absolutely, absolutely. But then you get that same story or that same joke, even if you copied it word for word, and you did it on an open mic night on a Monday in front of 7 people, or or go to an RSA on a Saturday, or wherever, and try and go with that gravitas, and get the same result.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It's really tricky. And
Yeah.
if you can do it, gosh, man, it's so skilled. But yeah, and like for me as well, like how do you how does he work that bit up? You know,
Yeah.
how does he test that? You know, and so, but that's him, you know, having an audience and people trusting him and doing what he does and stuff. And you know, whatever you think of him or his style or his comedy or what have you, but yeah, you have to sort of admire the skill set to be able to talk about
For
those
sure.
kind of things and to be able to make it funny.
I think trust is it. I mean, I think trust is the word. You've used trust a few times when I've heard you talking. I've thought, oh yeah, because your audience
Mm,
trusts you. So in other words, if you're going to go outside your brand, it's like, hang on, but they trust you not to
mm,
do that. So they trust. So I think trust is one of the things I'm
mm.
learning is trust in stand-up comedy is a massive thing. Hey, look, thanks for joining us today. Just to wrap up, you've talked a few times about this new special you're filming or recording. Is it the special that
Yep.
people will see at the comedy
Yep.
festival? Okay, so tell us about it. We've got it up on the screen for people who are watching. And this is what's going to be recorded in June, but being performed through May.
Yeah, pretty much. So, I'm going to be doing Christchurch, Wellington, and Auckland. And yeah, so it's called Radology, and it's basically it's going through. I look back at my Māori and Croatian heritage to understand why I go for the funniest thing and not necessarily the right thing to do is. And so which gets me into some pretty awesome stand-up stories, but also it's kind of like potentially, you know, is that the best thing for my family and for everyone around me and stuff like that. But yeah, so this will be part of, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to record it in June the 9th and 10th, and I'll announce that where that is a little bit later. But yeah, so but tickets are on sale for Christchurch, Wellington, and Auckland now, and yeah, I've been, yeah, this is going to be my best work.
Amazing.
This is shaping up to be really really great. So normally I'll have like one or two like really like kind of, oh, this is, you know, some great memorable moments and stuff, but this one is yeah, there's like 3 4 5 like really great set pieces, I guess you would call it. So yeah, if you've been a fan of my other stuff, you're going to really love this show. I think this is going to be the best version of it. So Nick Rado, Radology. You can go to my Instagram handle, which is I think in my my little name tag. I don't know if it's, yeah, that's it, at Nick Rado Comedian. And then just if you click on the link, it just says link tree, and then it just takes you to it really easily to all the tickets and podcasts and whatever other bits and pieces are going. And obviously when the Drybar special goes up, I'll chuck a link in there too. So yeah, follow there and you should be up to date.
And nickrado.com if they want to find out more about you. Hey, Nick, thank you so much for jumping in today and having a chat. It's been one of the ones I've
No
been looking
worries.
forward. It's interesting how often your name is mentioned by other comedians for being like precise and tight and observationally so good. So there are a
Oh,
lot of people
amazing.
within the
Oh, well,
industry and outside that are looking to you, and I'm really pleased you gave us
wow.
some time to have a chat about comedy on Let's Talk Funny.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, I wish I had been more precise and tight with my answers there.